This is going to be a very, very serious bear market. Governments around the world are panicking. The central banks are panicking. It's going to be the worst in my lifetime.
Please join us for our next live stream, Sunday, April 5th at 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll go over current events, past guests, and of course, gold and silver news. Once again, our next live stream will be Sunday, April 5th, 9 p.m. Eastern. See you then. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition at Silver Bullion Television, SBTV. I'm your host, Patrick Vieira. Housekeeping: if you are new to this channel or you have not already done so, please do subscribe. Click on the bell to be notified on new updates and give us a thumbs up if you like what we do. We really do appreciate your support. Interesting times are upon us, and today we have the ever interesting Jim Rogers, investor extraordinaire and best-selling author for such books as Street Smarts, of Bullion China, and Investment Biker, to name a few. Jim has traveled the world over, has seen it all, done it all, and always manages to be way ahead of the curve. And we are happy to have caught up with Jim at his home in Singapore. Jim, welcome back to SBTV. How are you doing?
I'm delighted to be back, Patrick. How are you? I'm fine. So far, so good.
I'm fine as well. Thank you, Jim. Market madness. Jim, amazing things have been happening since we last spoke. In your opinion, the market meltdown going on, is the flu the reason for the market mayhem? And if not, what do you think is pulling the markets down?
Well, the press certainly gives credit to the flu, and the flu is certainly a factor. There's no question about that. But no, the market, in America, the market been up over 10 years. That had never happened in American history. It's the longest bull market in American history. Doesn't mean it had to go down, but we're already, time-wise, we were overextended. As far as prices are concerned, we were very overextended in the American stock market, and I use that since that's the largest and most important. Also, the last 3 months or so, up until like February, the market went almost straight up in the U.S. It was probably I guess it was a blow off, in fact, in retrospect. So there are many reasons that the market should be going down. The debt has skyrocketed over the past 10 years. The virus came along, and it's certainly a factor. It's certainly part of it, but it came along and hit a very, very overextended, very expensive market with staggering amounts of debt. So yes, maybe it was the straw that broke the camel's back, but the camel's back was ready to be broken.
Yeah. With all this help that's going into the markets and still the volatility that remains and still happening, what does this tell you as an investor?
Well, it tells me as an investor that I have told you guys before that the next bear market we have, whenever it comes, is going to be the worst in my lifetime. In 2008, Patrick, we had a serious bear market because of too much debt. Well, since 2008, the debt has skyrocketed, gone straight up all over the world. So it tells me that this is going to be a very, very serious bear market. It looks as though it has started. The governments around the world are panicking. The central banks are panicking. Maybe they can pull off one more rally, one more blow off. But when it comes, and this may be it, but whenever it is, it's going to be the worst in my lifetime for many reasons.
Some actions being taken, such as the grossly pumped up repo market. In September last year, it seemed like it broke, and we saw the Fed jump in and throw a lifeline as banks had to essentially phone a friend. In your opinion, what do you think happened back then in the repo market, and why is it still growing? The help has to continue.
Well, the central bank in America, as in most central banks now, are basically made up of bureaucrats and academics. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know how markets are supposed to work. They don't know much about the real world. They all panic when things start going badly. People call up and say, "Oh, you must save us. It's the end of civilization." Well, these guys don't know anything. They're scared about their jobs. So they start doing everything they can to save the market. That's not their job. When the Federal Reserve, for example, I will use it again. When the Federal Reserve was set up, It was set up to maintain a sound currency, or essentially a sound banking system. Then later, and decades later, they added, and to help maintain full employment. Nowhere in any law, anywhere in the world, is any central bank set up to save stock markets, to save stock market investors. But these guys have evolved, and politicians think they can save them. So there's huge amount of pressure from politicians, society, for the central banks to somehow save the world. That was never their job. They don't have the ability in the end, and we're all going to pay a terrible price.
Typically when a recession hits, we need to lower the Fed funds rate or the interest rate on average some 4% or so. And we're at 0 to 0.25% right now. If when that next recession hits, does the Fed have anything left in its toolbox of theirs to prevent us from going into negative rates?
It certainly can go to negative rates. It's gone to negative rates in lots of parts of the world. It's never happened in world history, not in recorded world history anyway. So it's all a little bit ludicrous what's happening. It hasn't saved anybody. None of the countries which have negative interest rates have a bull market. They're all suffering just like everybody else. So the Americans say we're not going to have negative interest rates, but who knows? Who knows? They've never had 0 interest rates. They've never printed staggering amounts of money before.
So a lot of us do think what's going on is really Fed induced. I'm going to throw out 3 names at you and just give me your overall opinion. Bernanke, Yellen, and Powell.
Resign. A couple of them already have. Now Powell doesn't have a clue. The other 2 had no clue. By the way, Yellen said that we don't have to worry because the central bank has figured out the problem or figured out the system, and we'll never have financial problems again. We'll never have a bear market again. She got a PhD from an Ivy League university. If you believe her, you shouldn't listen to me. I don't believe her, and the market's already proving her deadly wrong. But that's the kind of people we're dealing with here. They don't know what they're doing.
Okay, resign. Got it. What do you think of companies who got that cheap money and they did stock buybacks? Companies who didn't reinvest in production, innovation, cost effectiveness, things like that. What's your opinion on money going back into buybacks?
Well, I'm not one to tell other people what to do with their money, but if that's what people wanted to do, fine, they did it. And I think they probably now all rue the day. They realize they made a serious mistake doing that. But who am I to tell people what to do with their money? That's just part of the reason we have the current situation. A staggering amount of money went into stock buybacks to try to hold up stocks. It helped artificially hold up stocks. But look at the airlines in America right now. They spend a lot of money buying back stock. Now they're begging for somebody, for government, to invest in them. No, and that's an obvious specific case of where it was probably a bad mistake. Many companies should have spent their money buying back bonds, but very few people bought back bonds because it doesn't help the stock price. What helps the stock price is to buy stocks.
Yeah. A lot of these companies, it's as if they're getting, they're being bailed out right now. How do you think the government decides who gets the money and who doesn't? A Boeing's going to get it, a Caterpillar, let's say, they might get it. But what about like a Starbucks or a Yum Brands? How does the government decide who gets it and who doesn't?
Well, it's going to depend on the ones who have the most votes. And Caterpillar has a lot of votes because they have a lot of workers there. And likewise, Boeing have a lot of votes, so they have a lot of workers there. Starbucks may have a lot of votes, but their votes are not the organized kind of people, and they're not necessarily. They don't have a union. They don't have an organization where the president of the union or president of the workers can call up and say, "You must save us." Most of the Starbucks people are, they're not. Well, I don't know how to say it. They're not full-time, long-term employees. They're short-term, temporary, whatever they happen to be. So that's not an organized mass of voters. But if they can put together enough organized voters, they'll get whatever they want.
lately in the news, we're seeing how Trump and Mnuchin they plan to give people a paycheck, a stay-at-home paycheck. What's your view on this?
This is all going to make the situation much worse in the end, Patrick. It's all artificial. They're propping up something that should never have, that was artificial in the first place. It was based on too much money printing, too much borrowing money by the central bank and by many other people. So this is just going to make it worse. And once they send out the $1,000, if they do, what are they going to do next year? Or what if the bear market continues? They're going to keep up the same game? Well, there comes a time, Patrick, when the market says, listen, we don't care. We understand that this is all garbage. We don't want your garbage anymore. We're going to sell no matter what you say. And in the end, the market has more money than anybody else, including central banks.
Okay, so let's say these handouts continue and we start to slide over into the modern monetary theory or MMT, where personal debts might be forgiven. Do we need to have a concern in that at some point all these free things will need to be paid, or do we ever intend to repay it?
Well, whenever people are desperate, they look for someone with a simple solution. Modern monetary theory is very simple. And people say, yeah, why not? Especially when they're desperate. So we've had many crackpot economic theories and crackpot economic professors in the past 500 years. We're going to have more. This may be adopted. I mean, it's absurd, but that doesn't mean it won't be adopted. And if it's absurd and if it's adopted, then we're going to pay a price eventually. This has to, in the end, there's no such thing as a free lunch. I mean, I'm not the first person to figure that out. And yes, maybe you can prop up everything for a while, but eventually the currency or something pays the price when you do absurd things.
Okay. And lately we seem to have a little bit of a oil price war going on. But what's the effect of cheap oil? What will it the effect it'll have on the US?
Well, we had peak known oil. Certainly, who knows if there's peak oil for all I know anyway. There's staggering amounts of oil still out there somewhere in the world. If it is, we don't know about it. Fracking came along and helped extend the oil production. But, fracking, that was a bubble, turned into a bubble. If you could spell fracking, people would write you a check. Well, now people realize, oh, they have to make money too. And you cannot magically make money from fracking unless prices are right and unless you're efficient. So that is what has happened with the price of oil. Now, the Russians and the Saudis or somebody has decided we have to do something about the frackers because they brought on a lot of supply and we need to put them out of business because Saudi Arabia anyway and Russia both have a reasonably low price production price. So, and it's lower than many of the frackers. So their plan, for better or for worse, is to lower the price of oil enough. Many of the frackers were already on the ropes because they borrowed a lot of money and their cost of production is not so low. So it's easy, not easy, but their plan is to put them out of business. It may very well work. Fracking is still a viable technology. Fracking will still exist, but fracking will not exist at $30 oil. The price of oil has to be reasonable, and the frackers have to be efficient, or they're not going to be able to compete. Saudi Arabia knows it. Russia knows it. So they're trying to save themselves.
Yeah. Jim, you brought up a pretty good point. Let's say this price war continues where we have cheap oil for a pretty extended amount of time. Fracking industry starts to disappear. Do you think the petrodollar or maybe even the US dollar as a reserve currency might also start to go down with it?
Well, certainly, the U.S. dollar, the United States is the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. No nation in world history has ever been so indebted. So certainly the dollar is going to disappear eventually, certainly as the world's reserve currency. All currencies, all whatever it has been throughout history that's gotten itself into this kind of situation has moved on, and people look for something else. We will certainly look for something else. I happen to own a lot of US dollars at the moment, not because it's a sound currency, but because in times of turmoil, people look for a safe haven. They think, for historic reasons, that his US dollars are a safe haven. It's not, but it doesn't matter. They think it is. So the US dollars, I hope, my plan is the US dollar is going to go up as people panic, and it'll make a high. It'll certainly get overpriced. It may turn into a bubble, depending on what happens elsewhere. And if it does, that will be the last hurrah, because then people will realize, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? You see what Washington's already doing, sending out $1,000 to everybody, spending $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there. Eventually, I'm not going to be the only one who realizes this is not sound, and people will look for something to replace the US dollar. The Russians and the Chinese and the Brazilians are already looking for something to replace the dollar. So the movement is underway.
China and the US. If we had to look at China and the US as being on a scale, regarding the trade war after round one anyway of talks, who's on the rise? Is China still on the rise? Is US on the rise, or are they sort of balancing things out?
Well, I don't know how the U.S. could be on the rise. It's the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. Maybe we can double and triple our debt again, and they're trying. They're trying to do that. Maybe we're not on the decline yet, but we're certainly not on the rise. If anybody's on the rise, as I look around, it is China. China is going to have problems. I mean, America became the most successful country in the 20th century, but along the way, we had many depressions, civil war, massacres in the streets, very little rule of law, and many problems. And yet we became extremely successful. So China's going to have many problems. You can see it right now. There are going to be bankruptcies in China. It's going to shock a lot of people. But I don't see anybody else at the moment who can replace America except China. But somebody will replace America. They have to. They always have. And America's in a bind.
The work ethic. Why does China seem to be more driven than the U.S. as far as work ethic?
Well, the Chinese work much harder than the U.S. I mean, many U.S. citizens, they grew up fat and happy. They grew up during good times. Their grandparents didn't grow up fat and happy. Their grandparents worked very hard and had a very high rate of savings and investment. But most Americans now think that everybody owes them a free lunch. Many, many, many Americans who think, wait a minute, what are you talking about? You owe me. You owe me. Give me some money. I don't want to have to go to work, hard work, save my money. I want a free lunch. The Chinese will get that. Don't worry. Everybody has always gotten there eventually, but it's usually the grandchildren or the great-grandchildren who get there eventually.
Jim, let's say, through this trade war and whatnot, if manufacturing did come back to the U.S. from China, can U.S. goods compete with Chinese goods, or perhaps maybe only certain industries would be able to compete?
Well, I mean, agriculture is still somewhat competitive by the U.S., but most U.S. manufactured goods are nowhere near competitive. I mean, the U.S. has staggering healthcare costs, if nothing else. I mean, the U.S. spends 15 or 20 times as much on healthcare as the rest of the world. I don't even think we're in the top 20 as far as life expectancy is concerned, because so much of the money gets spent on litigation and unnecessary testing and everything else. So it's hard to compete when you have staggering healthcare. Likewise, education. We spend huge amounts on education. Our kids don't even get in the top 20 in the international test results. So we have a very, very high cost structure, the U.S., just to open the door every morning. Education and medication, and haven't even gotten to the politicians and everything else, and all the guaranteed free lunches. No, it's very hard for the U.S. to be competitive with other countries in 2022, 2030.
What do you think is one of the greatest misconceptions the West has about China and vice versa, where China might have about the West?
Many, certainly in the U.S., they just shout the Chinese are evil and bad and bloodthirsty people, very evil people trying to steal all of our jobs. No, the Chinese are hardworking people who discipline their children and are trying to make a better life for themselves and their children, just as Americans did, just as British did before them, just as everybody did. You know, they worked hard, saved their money, invested, and produced very high quality, low priced goods. That's the way the world has always worked. You know, America put Britain down from being the number one in the world for the very same ways, the very same reasons. Everybody were trying to improve the lives of their children. That's what China's doing. When I've been in China, you know, the Chinese always very keen on America and Americans. These days, they're not so keen on the American government. Rightly so, if you ask me. I'm not keen on the American government right now. You know, the American government is making a lot of mistakes. But I don't know what misconceptions. I guess if there's a misconception, the Chinese think, well, the Americans are going to do what's right in the end. All governments and all countries try to take care of themselves first.
Gold and silver. Jim, you own precious metals. What's your opinion on how gold and silver are reacting to the markets right now?
Well, I own both. In fact, I want to buy a little silver shortly. If I weren't talking to you, I'd probably buy some more. No, always, you know, when people lose confidence in governments and money, they buy gold and silver. Whether they should or not doesn't matter. That's what they always have. Well, I'm a peasant like everybody else. You know, I own gold, I own silver, and I will be buying more.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned buying silver. Right now, there's an incredible rush to buy silver more so than gold. And I've calculated out from sales where for about every ounce of gold being bought, there's about roughly 400 or so ounces of silver that's being bought. So despite the silver rush, why do you think the silver price seems to keep going down?
That's a very good question. I should ask you. You should go to Silver Bullion and ask them. You know, they know more about silver than I do. I'm not quite certainly. Let me go back. On a historic basis, silver is much cheaper than gold right now. If you go back and look at any ratios over the past hundreds or even in biblical times, you know, gold is much, much more expensive now than silver is. Why silver is going down, I have no idea. Ask Silver Bullion. But for whatever reasons, I expect to buy some more silver and some more gold, but I'll probably buy more silver than gold at these circumstances.
Okay, well done. The door will always be open, and we'll be waiting for you, Jim. Spot price, is it the correct and true reflection of what physical silver and physical gold should be?
Who am I to argue with the spot price? No, I said if I were buying one now, I would buy silver because on a historic basis, it's much, much, much cheaper than gold. You know, markets are always getting out of whack. I have learned in my decades of investing that people say markets are always right. It's been my experience more often that markets are always wrong, that you can always find some anomalies in the markets and you should take advantage of them.
And we keep hearing stories about lockdowns. Do lockdowns and the potential of the supply of gold and silver, as well as other goods, not being able to get to market, does that concern you?
Of course it does. I mean, you know, if the world falls apart, we're going to have lots of problems in the world. We always have, and there have always been periods when the world has fallen apart. You know, all these people who've stockpiled gold and silver probably aren't nuts. I hope we're not nuts. All the people who stockpile toilet paper may not be nuts in the end. If the world collapses, it's going to be very hard. We're having lockdowns now. Airports are closing. Airlines are closing. It's very hard to travel these days. It's getting harder and harder to transport goods. Why not? We've had this kind of problem in the past. And if you think it's just, oh, those were the old days, don't think that nothing bad can happen again, because it always has and it always will.
Okay. And with these prices falling the way they are, your opinion, do you think the bull market has ended for precious metals?
No, 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 no. I would expect that gold and silver in the next coming turmoil will get overpriced. They may even turn into a bubble as well. I hope they don't, because if it become a bubble, I have to sell. I don't want to sell. I'd like for my children to have my gold and silver, because everybody should always have some gold and silver. If it becomes a bubble, if they become a bubble, I'll have to sell, because bubbles always collapse. Trying to say, oh, don't worry, it'll be okay in the end. Yeah, it will. But it may be 15, 20, 30 years before it gets back to the price of the previous bubble. So, no, it's a very good chance that gold and silver will turn into a bubble before this is over. I hope not. I just hope they get very overpriced.
Yeah. You mentioned your family, your children. Why did you choose to settle down in Singapore?
Well, I was teaching my daughter Chinese Mandarin. I realized that, and it was working perfectly in New York, but I realized there would come a time when she wouldn't. It wasn't cool to speak Mandarin. In fact, she already came home from the park one day and said, "Oh, people laugh at me because I speak Chinese. They all speak Spanish. I want to learn Spanish." So I realized that if I were really serious, I was going to have to move to a Chinese speaking city. And in the end, it was Singapore. China's too polluted. China's filthy. Many, many reasons to live in Singapore. So we wound up in Singapore.
Yeah, and we were one of the first countries to have a pretty good confirmation of coronavirus tolls starting to go up and up and up. How do you think the government responded to the virus, and what is your family doing to protect yourselves from the virus?
Well, we do. I mean, I wash my hands. We do what everybody else is doing. Uh, we try to stay away from places where we might get exposed. We're trying to be careful, like everybody else. Singapore so far seems to have done a good job. We'll know in a year or two who did the best job and who did the bad job.
Little bit about the future. Jim, we could not pull Wall Street away from the punch bowl back with what happened in the 2007-2008 crisis. And aside from Wall Street, Main Street, we're starting to see that helicopter is going to take off and give money to Main Street. Will Main Street be able to pull away from this helicopter money? Because we haven't been able to pull that punch bowl away from Wall Street.
If you start passing out free lunches, very few people are going to turn them down. If they send me a check for $1,000, I'm going to cash it like everybody else. It's not good for the country. It's not good for the world. It's not good for the society. But people want a free lunch. And when guys come along and offer easy answers throughout history, people will always say, "Give me the easy answer. Things are terrible. I want an easy answer." Most people are not knowledgeable enough to see that an easy answer could be bad in the long run. People want the easy answer. Modern monetary theory, I told you, sounds great when everybody's collapsing. It's a very simple, easy answer. People love things like that when things go wrong.
Okay. Um, some people say we're headed towards deflation. Some say inflation. Some guys even say hyperinflation. Uh, what do you see?
Probably both.
Oh,
Uh, the way things are going, if America and everybody else is going to spend the kind of money and print the kind of money they say they are, or they are starting to, that traditionally has led to serious inflation. May have deflation first, that's why they're printing all the money. Prices are going down everywhere. People are going to panic. So as prices go down and people panic and people go bankrupt, there are more screams for more easy money, and then you have the inflation. You can have both.
what should the wealthy be doing right now? What should the average Joe be doing right now? And what is Jim Rogers doing right now?
Everybody should be doing the same thing. You should only invest in what you know about. You shouldn't listen to some guy you see on the internet, because what do you do next? I could tell you what I'm doing, but you don't know what to do. A year from now, 2 years from now, you don't know why you bought it. If it goes up, you don't know what to do if it goes down. So if you want to survive, you really just stay with what you know, not somebody else. Stay with what you know and understand. And if you don't know and understand, save your money. Don't go out making investments in things you don't know about. That has never been successful. If it has been successful, it doesn't last long. Yeah. Now, everybody wants a hot tip. Everybody wants a hot tip. Hot tips will send you to the poorhouse.
Okay. Last question, Jim. With all this money printing and flooding the markets with fiat currency right now, at least for the U.S., when it's all said and done and it's over, if we ever get out of it, will the U.S. still remain a capitalist country?
Yes, it may be a different kind of capitalism. As you know, people always look for the free lunches. Yes. And even if it, quote, becomes socialist for a while, socialism has never worked. You know, for a while, a few people do well under socialism and communism, but it's never worked in the long term. People may very well experiment with it, but in the end, come on, it doesn't work. No, it has never worked anywhere in history for any extended period of time. Who knows what will happen in America or anywhere else, but I do know that in the end, socialism doesn't work. Communism doesn't work.
Yeah, and I know last time we spoke, you were of the philosophy of let's get rid of the Fed. I assume that still stands.
Well, yes, the Fed is just you. Yeah, I'm glad I said get rid of the Fed. Now they're proving it again. You know, they're the ones who printed huge amounts of money over the past 10 years. They ran up gigantic debts. Even their own balance sheet went up by 500%, 600%. I mean, these are impossible. Historically, these words are impossible, but they're true. We're living them. So yes, the Fed has added many problems to the world's economy and the world system. And yes, America's had two central banks. The first two disappeared. This one's going to disappear too eventually because they keep making things worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, completely agree with that. Jim Rogers, we thank you for your time, and we do wish you all the best and stay safe and warm and dry. I know it's raining in Singapore.
All right. Thank you. See you again. Let's do it again sometime.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
To learn more about Jim Rogers, his work, and his views, please visit his website, www.jimrogers.com, and his active blog at jimroger.blogspot.com. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the SBTV channel to be updated on new content, and do check out the SBTV podcast on iTunes and Spotify.